And good morning and welcome to this Wednesday, April 8th, 2015 edition of the Community Profile. Milton Baker along with you, co-host and executive producer Sandy Alexander. Couldn't be here today. She's under the weather, so to speak, and we wish her well. Sandy, hope you feel better soon and can be back with us next week. Now, the Community Profile is heard Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday here on WLON, WOHS, WCSL, and on the World Wide Web at ktcbroadcasting.com. And you can watch on our studio camera today at ktcbroadcasting.com. And when I say worldwide, I mean worldwide. We might have some worldwide viewers today. Who knows? We are very pleased to have with us in the studio a couple from the United States, Valerie Aker, who is now Valerie Aker Keefe, from right here in Cherryville, born and raised here. Valerie, good morning to you.
Good day.
Good day. Uh-oh. Well, here's where we're going in just a moment. We're going to Australia in just a moment. And her husband, Dwayne, I'm sorry. Dwayne Keefe. And Dwayne, you hail from what area of the United States?
Yeah, that'd be Florence, South Carolina.
Florence, South Carolina. So you're both pretty local. And how'd you guys, now your husband and wife, you have a son, and he's 18 years old. He's not with us here today, but his name's Austin. And is he listening in at?
Sure he is.
Is he at Grandma and Grandpa Akers here in Cherryville? Yeah. So hello to the Aker family in Austin listening in today, and everyone. So you're from Florence, and you're from Cherryville, and you live now for the last 14 years in Australia. But how'd you guys meet? How'd that come about?
Well, I got called to the ministry at about the age of 21, and at the time I was going to college over at Baptist Bible College in Springfield, Missouri, and I came home to Florence, South Carolina, looking for a job that I can sort of raise some money so that I can continue to pay for my college. And I went to church one day, and this young lady was walking down the road, and she says, how's things going? I said, well, I've been currently looking for a job. And she says, well, I work for a trucking company. Maybe I can help you out.
Oh, okay.
Carolina Freight.
Good old Carolina Freight. There you go.
Yeah, I was working as an account manager in Florence, South Carolina.
Oh, okay. That's right. They had terminals everywhere, and one of them just happened to be in Florence.
So he got the job.
Yeah.
And we had our first and last date, I guess, our first date, and then we ended up never dating anyone else and got married.
There you go.
So you can thank Carolina Freight.
Carolina Freight had a lot to do with that, right? And now your son, Austin, he was born in
Springfield, Missouri, where we were going to Bible college.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when did you guys? How did you get the calling to go to Australia as missionaries? How did all that come about?
Well, that's probably my fault. I had a calling to go to Australia before we even met, and the Lord pressed upon my heart to go to missions, and I've always had a desire to go to Australia. At the current time, I was actually working in physical therapy, looking to get my master's degree in physical therapy, but through a discipleship program I was going through at Florence Baptist Temple, my home church, the Lord began to impress upon my heart missions, and so I surrendered to the mission field, and I put that on hold and went over to Baptist Bible College to get my degree in missions and Bible. And whenever I came home, I met her. One of the first things I did was to let her know that I was looking to be a missionary to Australia. And if she wanted to continue the relationship, that would be great. If she didn't want to go to Australia, then we probably needed to be just friends.
Yeah.
And so from there, she agreed that maybe the Lord was calling her to Australia as well. And so from there, she went to Bible college and got her degree as well. And then we did an internship, and off to Australia we went.
Off you went, and that had to be obviously an understatement to say a life-changing event for both of you. But Valerie, what did you think about the idea of leaving everybody behind, so to speak, and heading to Australia?
Well, it was difficult in some ways, and then it was an easy decision because I had a good job as account manager. I had a company car, and enjoy my job in Carolina, but I'll be driving around making sales calls, and I would drive down to Charleston and to other areas and listen to Christian radio. And I didn't want to get out of the car. I wanted to keep hearing the preacher preach. I listened to the whole Bible while I was doing my sales, traveling. And I think God was already getting me ready.
Yeah.
So when he told me, he didn't waste any time. I think it was the 5th date. He said, I'm going to college. I'm going to keep going to college, and I'm moving to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And it really wasn't that difficult. I was ready.
Yeah.
So God was getting me ready, I think.
So,
of course, I miss family.
Yeah, you miss your family. Now, I guess as over the 14 years, technology has allowed you to, see your families back here in the United States a little bit better with things like Skype.
In fact, it's much better than it was many years ago because Skype and FaceTime, and you do get to speak with your family. And some of his parents have visited, and his brothers, so we've had even some family come over.
Yeah.
But it's still not the same. But it is good that you do get to see them and talk to them.
Yeah. So, to borrow a phrase from a TV show, you loaded up the truck. Well, not exactly the truck, but you loaded up and moved to Australia, and that was about 14 years ago.
Yeah. The funny story is me being in the trucking business. Dwayne loaded trailers. We loaded our own trailer.
Okay.
Our container, and we had no damages, and it went all the way to Sydney, Australia.
Yeah. Now Sydney, and whereabouts in Australia? How close are you to? Are you close to Sydney or?
When we started our first ministry, we were actually just outside of Sydney, in Liverpool. We actually had to be sponsored into the country, and so there was a Filipino church there who were willing to sponsor us in, and so we worked with them for a couple of years for government regulations, and then we moved from there and went up to Queensland, up to Yeppoon, which is right outside the Great Barrier Reef there. So many of you are familiar with the Great Barrier Reef. That's where we started. There in Queensland, we took over a church there. It was a very small church, and then after a couple of years, we turned that over to a pastor. Started another ministry in a place called Cherryville up in Queensland as well. Then we came home for a while, went back to Australia, and we started a church just outside the nation's capital in New South Wales, right outside the ACT, called Cherryville. And that's where we've been there for about the last 9 years, working with that church. Upon our return, we're actually going to be moving over to Perth, Australia, the western part of Australia, and that's where we're looking to start a new ministry there.
Okay. And you're in the United States now, a 6-month furlough. You've been here, what, a couple months?
1 month.
1 month. Going back in August. So I kidded with you before we went on the air. You get 2 summers this year because, for those who don't know, the seasons are exactly opposite in Australia. So you left. When you left, what was the weather like?
It was still summer, almost the end of summer.
Yeah, we're heading into
left
the
Perth. It was about 110 degrees.
Ooh, now we don't want that. Don't bring that 110 here with you. But anyway, so you've been in Australia some 14 years now, and of course, a lot of changes. You mentioned to me, it's a little foreign coming back to the States now because things are a little different. First of all, you got to pay attention which side of the road you're driving on.
Definitely.
Right.
And there's some things there's some expressions and things you use in Australia, or things that are called different things that sometimes here in the United States you might slip up and use a word for an Australian word for something in United States terms, I guess. So you've kind of gotten settled in pretty good.
Well, once you've lived over in Australia for 14 years, you pick up the lingo and you pick up the language, and when you come back here, you instinctively call things what we call them over in Australia. And so we've got a few funny looks from some waitresses and some other individuals.
Yeah, I think the word napkin, what did you?
Serviette.
Serviette.
Yeah, tomato sauce for ketchup.
Tomato sauce.
A rock melon is a cantaloupe. So there's a lot of bologna is Devon.
Okay.
So we've had to learn a few. They speak English, but there's a lot of slang words. A lot.
Yeah, a lot of. Okay. All right. Now, tell us about Australia and Christianity in Australia. From what I've talked to your father about a little bit, because, by the way, folks who don't know, Valerie's father is Danny Aker, and Danny and I do a lot of ball games on the radio, high school and Legion Sports, and we've talked a lot about it since you've were coming. He talked about you coming here, and since you've been here, a very small percentage of Christian population in Australia. Is that correct?
That's correct. If you were to look at a religious map per se and look at Australia, it would be predominantly non-religious. That's what it would be labeled. Less than studies that we've seen, less than 2% know Jesus Christ as Savior, truly know Jesus Christ as Savior, and less than 5% go to church of any kind at all. And so they're very self-focused. It's a very affluent area, very rich area, so they really see no need for religion. They really see no need for God. And then you have other areas like the Catholics who have their casinos. And so most would sort of line up with Catholicism because of the fact they like to go and gamble at some of the clubs and things, and so that's what they're familiar with. And so you will see maybe a high percentage of Catholics, but that's in relation to that. They're not really actually practicing Catholics. And so there's a need there for sure.
I think maybe me and maybe a lot of folks, what think we know about Australia, we've learned through TV and maybe the mini-series, The Thornbirds. I always picture, these large open ranches, and you mentioned the Catholics. The Catholic Church had a lot to do with that mini-series. I don't know if you guys have ever watched that program, but how much does that? And that was Australia set in a long time ago, anyway. But is Australia very rural, or is it a little of both? I know
It's diverse.
I've heard the outback.
Really.
And
it's very diverse because you've got, the 5 capitals are major cities. They're very large: Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Perth. You've got the suburbs, which are very modern. In fact, all the homes are crammed in together. But we drove from Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, in February. We drove all the way across Australia because we had to get our car to Perth, and we went through the outback. So you've got about 90% of the people live near the coast if you just wrap around the coast of Australia. But when you go through the outback, we drove literally for hours and didn't see a house, a building, even sometimes cars. So it's the center of Australia is very, desolate. And you have ranches, you have people that kids go to school by air. They do the online school where doctors have to fly in. So it's got both. It's very modern, but then it's also got a very rural population as well. Now,
I think everybody has probably heard of Sydney, Australia. And I don't keep up with a lot of things, but have the Olympics, or are they coming, or have they already been?
2000, they had the Olympics.
They had the Olympics that long ago.
I think it was 2000.
Wow!
Yeah,
I'm really behind. I'm really behind the times. I was thinking it was maybe.
It's been in Melbourne maybe 30 or 40 years ago, so they've had a couple.
Okay, all right. So, do you feel in the United States, we say the world's getting smaller and smaller. Our news, even our local news, is not so much local anymore. In Australia, do you feel in touch with the rest of the world pretty much?
Yes, because they actually play a lot of U.S. news as well. So every time there's something goes on over here, especially something major, they do announce it over in Australia. And part of that, I think, is they sort of like to broadcast the bad news from everybody else. Maybe make themselves look better, I don't know. But we don't hear a lot about the bad things that happen in Australia, usually all the bad things that happen in other parts of the world. So we do get a lot of world news focus over in Australia. But the crime in Australia is really not that bad as other parts of the world like the U.S.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a do they have gun control, anything like that?
A while back they had a massive massacre that took place with guns. And what they did in 1996, and what they did is they did a government buyback program, and about 90% of the Australians were willing to do that, and so they got rid of all their guns. And so you don't have a whole lot of guns over in Australia now. If you do require a gun, well, basically you have to go and prove your need for a gun, whether it be for work or if you live in the outback or on a farm of some sort and you got dingoes and things like that you have to use guns for. Well, then you can be licensed to do that, but they're very hard to come by.
Yeah. Wow.
I think it's more successful there because, it's a smaller country. You're only talking about 22 million compared to Australia and to America. And also, they don't have the hunting culture like
Yeah.
we have here.
Yeah.
I think it'd be more
Different
difficult to do that here.
Different mindset.
But they haven't
yeah.
had a mass shooting since that happened.
Well,
Yeah, so it's worked for Australia.
Yeah.
You know, so it's very different. But yeah, it's kind of getting used to also want to come back and go hunting.
yeah.
So he's pretty excited about that.
There you go. Other cultural differences and things. How about one big thing when you want to contact family here in the United States is the time difference. I mean, you might call if you were in Australia and we were to call you right now, what time of day?
Midnight.
Well, we're about, depending on the time change and all, we're about anywhere between 11, 12, 13 hours ahead.
So it's about midnight tonight.
Okay, so it's about midnight.
Yeah.
You're a little bit further ahead of us down there in time wise. So yeah, you have to plan things like that, I guess. And do you get to keep up with American sports, and what kind of sports are big in Australia as well?
Well, we do get to keep up with some American sports. They do have free-to-air sports that come on from time to time. We see some of the football. We can keep up with that. A few of the baseball games. We don't see a whole lot of the Atlanta Braves, though. They just do more Midwest games.
Yeah.
But we do see a little bit of baseball if Super Bowl or a World Series or something comes on like that. You can see a little bit of that. But we don't get a whole lot of that. Do see a little bit of NASCAR as well.
Yeah.
But the major sports over in Australia would be your rugby and your AFL and also they have cricket. Those are probably three, and a little bit of soccer as well. So
Okay.
those are your main sports over there. They do have a little bit of baseball. They've started an Australian Baseball League, which Canberra was one of the areas that we were living close by that we get a chance to go to their games. And they do have some visiting players that come from the States in the off season, and they'll go there and play baseball.
Okay.
And they have the V8, the race car, V8 race cars, and the MotoGP are big.
Yeah.
So I really love the V8 supercars. Dwayne's kind of a fan now of
I
V8
see.
supercars.
Okay. Do you run into other Americans very much in Australia? Is it a place that a lot of Americans choose to go to live?
Well, in Canberra, we were able to see a lot because of military. The place that we lived in, Cherryville, about 40% of it was defense. And a lot of that, you could see a few Americans come over. They do have a few American bases over there as well. And so from time to time, we do see some Americans over there. Now, where we're moving to, I'm not sure if we'll see a whole lot of Americans there, but they do have a lot of South Africans that have been coming over, and some of the British have been coming over as well to that particular area.
There's a lot of Asians. You see a lot of Asians and people from Japan, China,
Okay.
just because of the location. We're a lot closer to those countries, and New Zealanders and Papua New Guinea.
Okay.
So it's a melting pot for sure.
There you go. Before we hit the 10:30 mark, I want to remind anyone listening on WCSL that at 10:30 our program automatically switches to a Christian programming block we have, but you can pick up this interview in its entirety on WLON 1050 or WOHS 1390 in Shelby, or you can watch it in its entirety on the internet. But don't be surprised at 10:30 when it cuts us off and goes to our Christian programming block here that we have every morning here on WCSL. But back to, I'm interviewing today the Keefe family, Valerie and Dwayne, and their son Austin's listening in back in Cherryville at home with grandparents. And they're here back in the United States, been in Australia about 14 years, back here in the United States for a 6-month furlough, but then it's back to Australia in August, and then to a new location you mentioned. And do you feel a lot of reward in what you do, being there 14 years? It must be rewarding to you, and there must be some sense of satisfaction and that you're doing the Lord's work and everything's going well.
Well, the ministry there is it is difficult. They living in a very affluent area, so they see no need for the Lord and for God. So when we do have some people come to know Christ, it is very rewarding. We first moved to Jerabomba. We had a bit of a yard sale, and we had one of our neighbors come up to us and My wife was there by herself at the time, and he says, well, what do your husband do? He says, well, he's a pastor, and we're looking to start a church here. And he says, well, I guess I won't be having him over for a beer, then will I?
No.
Well, after 5 years of developing that relationship, I had the opportunity to lead him to Christ in his driveway. And since then, he's invited us over a number of times. And so we're grateful for those stories like that because on average, it takes about anywhere between 3 to 5 years of developing a relationship with the Aussie before you can really get to a place where you can share the gospel of Jesus Christ with them, and they're willing to listen. And that's important. So it is about building relationships. So you have to be there for the long haul for sure.
Yeah, so it's a process. It's a long process, and sometimes you just don't go over and shake a hand and say, "Come on down to church," and that's the way it doesn't work that way. BBFI missionaries to Australia. What's the BBFI? What's that mean? What's
That's
that stand
the
for?
Baptist Bible Fellowship International, and they're a clearinghouse out of Springfield, Missouri, and they were associated with Baptist Bible College where we went to school. So basically, we're independent Baptist missionaries, so we have to go out and raise our own financial support through different churches. And that's another reason we're home, is to go back to these churches. We report back, tell them what we've done, and they financially support us. So the BBFI takes all the checks, all the funds, and they wire us one check over a month. And they also help us with insurance and, different things like that. So they're kind of a liaison between the local church here, the different local churches, and our work in Australia. And it's a conglomerate of Baptist pastors that have this association. So it's a big help to us to have someone that has that experience, because it's run by ministers and by missionaries off the field.
Do other denominations do similar things that?
Yeah,
that
there's different groups have different.
Yeah.
And this was just the avenue that we took, and you have to be approved, and they make sure you're qualified, and they kind of represent you and endorse your work with the different pastors. So like next month we will be traveling everywhere from Florida to Virginia out to Texas to see these churches, and we're here too to raise more support, because the cost of living in Australia is 2 to 3 times what you pay here.
Really? Oh, okay.
At least 2. Sometimes it can be 3 times depending on what you're buying.
Wow.
So and we have to deal with the exchange rate, which changes all the time. So so that's another reason we're home, is to raise money and to.
So this is not a vacation necessarily that you're on.
We're trying to do. We want to see family. I mean, it is a hard thing for us, because we want to spend as much time as we can with our family. But at the same time, we have responsibility and obligation to go back to these churches and report back, just like in the Bible times, Paul went back and reported to the local church. Yeah.
So over the 14 years, how many times have you been back into America?
Third time.
This is our third time.
Yeah. It's quite you just don't jump on a plane and come home.
You have to leave what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's very expensive, and it takes about 30 hours to get here. So.
30 hours. Wow. That's a long time to be traveling anywhere. Yeah, on a plane or any form of transportation. So we were talking again before we went on the air about the Australians' form of government, and could you explain to the listeners what that is? How they have a prime minister, and go ahead.
Yeah, it's still a monarchy. Australia is still under British rule. But even if you look at the Australian flag, you've got the British flag on it. But because of the proximity, we're not that close to England, and we have a good running government. The Queen and the British kind of leave Australia alone. I think she's only intervened once in Australia's history. So we do have a prime minister, which is Tony Abbott right now, and there's generally 2 parties, the Liberal and the Labour Party, and they do they work together. Sort of, I guess. They don't always get along. And you have elected officials. You have members of parliament. We have a parliament, and then it's led by the prime minister.
And you were telling me you folks are dual citizens of both the United States and Australia.
That's correct.
You get to vote in both countries?
Yes, and a little known fact is in Australia, voting is compulsory. In fact, Austin turns 18 in 2 months, and he will have to vote when he goes back, and you are fined if you do not vote.
You must
vote.
So
everyone votes in Australia. So it's kind of interesting, and they will find you.
What about that?
Yes.
And the voting age is 18.
18.
Yeah. So wow. Think about that, folks out there who, when sometimes our voter turnout is 5% or something like that for local elections or something, and hardly even 50% for the the national campaigns. Keep in mind that in Australia it's a compulsory thing. You must vote. How about that? Well, we've covered a lot of ground here today. Anything else you'd like to say about your ministry, about the people of Australia, anything like that?
Well, I guess going back to the expense of Australia, just to give you an example of that, we lived in a small 3-bedroom unit, and we were paying nearly $2,000 a month for rent, and looking at petrol over there, gasoline. You call here, you're looking at probably $7.50 a gallon be the conversion. So just to sort of give you an idea of the expense that over in Australia. But the average salary where we were at, the average salary there was about $180,000 a year for the average person. So the expense is greater, but they also make a lot more money over there as well.
Yeah.
And you also have a lot of government assistance as well for those who can't afford to live there, who are citizens of that country. They do have a dole system, kind of like a Medicare system, whereas they get child support, they get assistance with their prescriptions, they get rent assistance, and so an average young lady who is a single mother, maybe have 2 or 3 kids, she can get the equivalent of about $1,400 every fortnight or every 2 weeks over in Australia. And in addition to that, she can get rent assistance and prescriptions free as well. So they do have a socialized government over there. But the problem with that is whenever it comes time for major surgery, it may take you a year or 2 years to get your tonsils removed. And so you have that aspect of it as well. So just a little more information on the Australian people there. In concerning with our work there, the scriptures are pretty clear. How will they call upon the Lord in whom they have not heard? And so we take that verse very seriously, and because we believe that everybody deserves a chance to know Jesus, and so we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to go over there to share the love of Jesus Christ with them, so they will have an opportunity to accept Him as Savior and have a home in heaven. And we are very grateful for the churches that do support us here with their finances and with their prayers, so that we can go and we can share Christ with them. And so we want to just say a public thank you to those churches that are out there that may be listening, and thank you for the individuals as well that have assisted us and helped us to not only get to Australia, but to stay in Australia to do the work that God has called us to do.
Well, both of you, since being back in the United States, you've both been, of course, back to Cherryville, and you've been back to your home in town in Florence. I know you've probably seen a lot of differences since you came back. Kind of anything that's been a big shock to you since you came back. I imagine you have in Cherryville big shock.
Well, the thing that really blew me away is the number of churches we have. We take it for granted.
Oh yeah.
Because to see, just our drive in here, we passed several churches. We come from an area where there are churches in Australia. There's several denominations, but they're few and far between. And for us you can drive through Cherryville, and there's a church on every street almost. Main street. So. I think we take it for granted here, the availability to go to a good church and hear God's word and have a good fellowship of believers, because you don't have that there. We could, and we're going where we're going back to in August is a brand new area, and in 10 to 15 years, we'll have over 200,000 people moving north of Perth, and there'll be no churches. And 200,000 people, that's about the size of Greensboro, so a little bit under, but. That's going to be of course we can't do it all ourselves, but that's where we're going to start out, and we're real excited about it because, we just don't have that there.
It does. It just, it boggles my mind, but like you said, the people, the great majority of people, they just don't have any use for religion. They don't think about it. It's not a part of their lives, and that just,
No worries, mate. I think it's more of a life's pretty good. I mean, it's a beautiful country. I mean, we've seen some of the most beautiful beaches, and you've got the kangaroos and the tropical birds, and it's a beautiful place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, they do well. They do well, and I think that's part of it is they don't see that they're lost. We're kind of a different missionary than the ones that go to Africa or to a third world country. We live on an income less than the people we minister to, but sometimes it makes it harder because they don't see a need. They don't see a need at all.
That's one of the challenges that we have when we go to Australia is we have to get to them to the point where they see that they are lost and they need to be saved. And sometimes that's very difficult because they don't want to see that. They're good. They're all right with the man upstairs and no worries, mate, she'll be right, and whenever I get there, I'll deal with it then. They don't really see themselves as being lost, and so that's one of the struggles that we really face, the challenges, I guess, that we face in Australia, is that we sort of need to get them lost before they can get saved.
But they're good people, and the thing is, once you get that relationship, the people that have been part of our ministries, and especially I work with children and the kids, and they're very open to, learning about the Lord. They want to know. I think especially if you can talk to them when they're younger. It just takes a long time to get that relationship, but there's some great churches over there that we've worked with and some solid people that they can come to that relationship, but it just takes longer. It's just a long haul work, and it will never be a work of huge numbers.
And once you get that mateship established, well, then that's a very tight bond. And so even with some of the mates that I've come to know, we can be very open with them and let them know their status before God or their lifestyle or anything, and we have that openness, so we can do that. But getting to that point is what takes time.
Yeah, how about that? It's fascinating story. You guys ever going to write a book?
Oh no, we've got a lot of stories, so maybe one. I've always wanted to write a book, so maybe one day.
There you go. I think it would be very, very interesting.
Use that journalism background.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. And well, thank you so much, Dwayne and Valerie, for coming in, and hi to your son again, who's listening at the grandparents' house in Cherryville today. And folks, wherever they may be listening, you've got family in the Florence area listening, maybe on the internet there. So hello to you folks. I know they miss you guys, but they understand what you're doing is the Lord's work, very, very important work too. Thanks for coming in. I know Sandy, she wanted to be here so bad, but she's had trouble with her eyes the last couple of weeks, an infection going on there, and her eye, quite frankly, is swollen shut. And she can't drive that way. So, Sandy, I know you're listening in, dear, and I know you'd love to have been here. You would have really enjoyed. I'd like to have her here to ask her, get her input on the program too. But thanks again so much for coming in.
Well, thank you.
Man.
All right. That's our community profile for today. And again, thanks to Dwayne and Valerie Keefe and their son Austin, who couldn't be here today, but he's in town here in Cherryville. But that's our community profile, one of our very interesting shows, very, very interesting show today. And we invite you to join us again Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday for community profile programs. And as always, if you have any suggestions or topics we might cover on the show, just let us know. We'll be glad to look into it for you. We'll see you next week.